Have you ever had a dream that stuck with you? And I don't mean the deep desire for something or a vision of the future you long for. I mean a dream. I have. I can vividly remember the first dream where I soared through the sky, defying gravity and flying all on my own power. And then the slap in the face I felt when I woke up and realized that it wasn't real. See, dreams are funny. Caught somewhere between the conscious and unconscious mind, psychologists theorize the images and events that make up our dreams are a way for the brain to consolidate our memories. They also often relate to the things we associate with those new memories. For example, maybe you were at a park where you had your first date, and now your dream is starring your first partner. Or perhaps you're in the woods and the mood is very dour because that relationship ended poorly. People make money off of interpreting what these dreams mean, but often it's just a series of stressors that your brain won't let go of. Regardless, I think it's so interesting that despite having more than half a dozen dreams a night, we are lucky to remember more than 2 to 3 across an entire week. What fascinates me most about this is that when we are consolidating memory, trying to put the short term into long term paths, we can remember part of that process. These strange images and patterns and feelings that can so quickly shift in tone and perspective, it's frankly disorienting when looking back with your conscious mind. Often we don't remember them at all or forget what happened shortly after, but sometimes you have a dream you just don't forget. Sorry, that was a weird tangent. This video isn't about dreams. This is a retrospective on The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Our jump forward this time isn't quite as far as the jump from Zelda 2 to A Link to the Past. The development cycle on Link's Awakening was less than 2 years, bringing us to June 6th, 1993. Initially, the development of Link's Awakening was just an after-hours project between Zelda devs to see if they could port A Link to the Past to the company's new handheld console, the Game Boy. Like many Nintendo consoles of the future, the Game Boy was less powerful than a lot of its contemporaries, with a simple grayscale display and no backlight, but it was significantly cheaper than those contemporaries and made the Game Boy a runaway success, selling 118 million units by the end of its life cycle. And it was just as, if not more powerful than the NES, leading to many ports of NES and SNES games to this new console. And despite all of the hurdles, the small group of devs found that they could make it work. Mostly. And the project grew so large that it eventually caught the eye of Takashi Tezuka, who came on board the project as director for a brand new game. Given its freeform nature as a side project by a group of developers mostly just dicking around, Link's Awakening ended up as a very strange project compared to its predecessors. Even the lead writer said that they felt it was like writing a parody of the series at some points. With the script written by A Link to the Past veterans Kensuke Tanabe and Yoshiaki Koizumi, and sharing the same director and co-creator of Zelda in Tezuka, this game wasn't just a simple shovelware port to ensure the Game Boy had a new Zelda title, but it's not quite a full-fledged Zelda 4 either. That is not to downplay Link's Awakening. In fact, I have to make a retraction from my Zelda 2 video. I put Link's Awakening in D tier, and it needs to be up here in A tier. In fact, hold on, let me just... Okay. Along with seeing which links got the biggest bag, we're going to be updating this tier list as I complete these games because some of these I haven't beaten in years. This game is shockingly good for a Game Boy game, but as I'm sure you're noticing, my footage has color, and I said the Game Boy can only produce grayscale. See, in 1998, the game received a slightly retooled re-release for the Game Boy Color made by Nintendo R&D 2, a team dedicated to these kinds of simple ports. Largely, this game is just an enhanced version of the original game, but there are a few changes between the two versions that I will discuss when they come up. And with that, let's just jump into the game. Link's Awakening is a sequel to A Link to the Past, which makes sense given its origins, and starts with Link returning from a trip to distant lands where he honed his skills and his mind against new challenges to ensure he could keep Hyrule safe. Caught in the midst of a storm unlike any his small sailboat could handle, Link fights the waves and winds before he is struck by lightning and his boat explodes. He washes up on a beach of a solitary island where he is found by a young girl exploring the beach and taken back to her home. Waking in her house hours later, Link is greeted by a young girl who shares a striking similarity to Zelda. When Link says this, she rebuffs him and says that she is Marin, and the man over there is Terran, her father, and they have nursed Link back to health after finding him on the shore of Koholint Island, the place Link and the player find themselves now. She also mentions that monsters have been growing more aggressive as of late, saying he should make sure he stays safe. But before he can leave, he must speak with Terran, who will tell Link again that monsters are about and he should go check the beach where he washed up for any of his items before handing him back his shield, but interestingly enough, not his sword. We're 4 videos deep into the series, so I feel this should stick out to any player who has a passing familiarity with these games. After all, Link has always been given his sword and shield in tandem, but not in this game. And given I stated earlier that the writers felt like they might have been writing a parody of Zelda, it may seem that this decision was one to simply twist the formula, but it serves as a very strong teaching tool that highlights one of the major changes of this game compared to its predecessors. Your shield used to be a permanent, passive part of Link's arsenal, allowing you to block projectiles and eventually magic attacks after receiving some kind of upgrade. But as you make your way from Marin and Terran's house, and then out of Mabe Village in general, you see that this time, Link's shield is an active ability that allows you to block all damage, including melee damage. You can use it to push enemies back, similar to the sword clank from A Link to the Past, and must use it to push these sea urchins and progress further down the beach. Reaching the point where your raft washed up, you find your sword and are then greeted by a talking owl. Sure. The owl tells the player that with Link's arrival, monsters have begun wreaking havoc on Koholint Island, and if Link plans on leaving, he must first wake the Windfish, and that the first step in this journey is the mysterious forest north of Mabe Village. With your sword in hand, the Sword Search theme is replaced by a new rendition of the Zelda overworld theme, and Link is truly let loose on Koholint. With your sword in hand, the player can not only defeat the enemies that litter the path back to Mabe Village, but you can also cut down bushes, signaling to the player that new items are going to be vital in your ongoing adventures on the island. After all, your shield could push the sea urchins, but your sword can slay them, letting you make more progress with just one item. Heading north, the player can speak with these identical kids at the edge of the village and get introduced to the bizarre members of Mabe Village. All of these kids will say normal video game tutorial things, like how you save or where you come back when you die, but then all end that statement with the, "Why? I have no idea. I'm just a kid." There's also Old Man Ulraira, a shy man who will give you hints at a telephone booth. Huh. I guess Koholint has managed to get more technologically advanced than Hyrule despite their isolation. Good for them. You also meet Popple and Mamasha, the parents of the quadruplets and their brand new baby, who wants a Yoshi doll. Okay, I'm beginning to see the parody now. It also goes to show how much leniency the devs were given with this game. After all, adding Mario characters feels like a bit of a stretch, even if it and Zelda are sister series. Right, the chain chomps. Popple will also tell you that he's going to get lost in the hills later and that you should go look for him then. Okay. Exploring Mabe also allows the player to find 2 heart pieces, returning from A Link to the Past. One here, where you cut these bushes and fall into the well, showing off this game having a selective Z-axis like its predecessor, and one from this fishing minigame. I suppose I should talk about these in a bit more detail. In A Link to the Past, 2 minigames hide heart pieces, 3 if you want to include the race, while the rest serve as a way to make the player more money. Of the 6 in the game, 3 are picking a chest at random, 1 is the aforementioned race, 1 is the digging game, just another form of gambling, and the final one is a very rudimentary shooting gallery game. All in all, nothing much to write home about. In fact, I chose not to. But Link's Awakening manages to introduce more complex minigames, even if they are largely middling. The fishing minigame here requires the player to pay 10 rupees and then try to fish up the big fish at the bottom of the pond. And if you get this one in this nook, you can even win your second heart piece. This, unfortunately, gives the player the impression that the other minigames might reward you with a heart piece, but given this game has 12 heart pieces to A Link to the Past's 24, that's not the case. It doesn't mean the minigames are useless, however, as Link is told by Mamasha she saw a Yoshi doll in the game hall to the south. Inside, you're faced with the trendy game, your classic claw game with a bit of a twist. Using the B button to move the crane to the right and A to move it down, the player's goal is to win items off this conveyor belt with strong timing. Now, this could prove frustrating if the one required item was on this conveyor, but the Yoshi doll is actually in the middle, completely stationary. The third minigame is one we'll talk about later, so for now, let's focus on the Yoshi doll. Winning it and bringing it back to Mamasha, she hands you a ribbon and you begin one of the best trading sequences in Zelda. Following in the tradition of the Straw Millionaire, an old Japanese fable, Link starts with one item and over the course of the game will continue to trade up to different things before being granted one of the best items in the game at the end. Only 4 steps are necessary to complete the game, but like the optional spells in Zelda 2, I would highly encourage anyone playing Link's Awakening to follow this quest to its conclusion. The player can actually complete the next 2 parts of the quest right now. If you thoroughly explore Mabe Village, you can head inside this door to Madame Meow Meow's house and meet her prize chain chomp, Chow Chow, who laments not having beautiful accessories, and you can hand it the ribbon in exchange for dog food. You can then bring this dog food back down to the beach and speak with Sale, an alligator who has a craving for canned foods and will literally beg Link for the dog food. Handing it over, he will give you bananas and end what we can do for now with this side quest. Thorough exploration of Mabe also reveals your first secret seashell, an item that is described as bringing you something great if you collect a lot of them. All of this serves as an effective invisible tutorial for the overworld exploration in Link's Awakening, training the player to be on the lookout for heart pieces, secret seashells, and people who might want something you could get in the trading quest. Now, I don't believe this serves as quite as strong an intro as A Link to the Past, given it entirely forgoes the dungeon delving experience, but it still does an admirable job at teaching the player many of the skills necessary to find everything this game has to offer. And if you're struggling, you do have Ulrira's telephone hints along with the Mabe library, filled with books that will tell a new player about many of the controls that someone who has never picked up a Zelda game may be unfamiliar with. It also has a filled-out atlas, a sharp contrast to Link's. Link's map starts blank and will slowly fill out the more you explore, similar to dungeon maps from A Link to the Past or Zelda 1, providing the player with a greater sense they're exploring a land unfamiliar to them. If I were to levy a criticism in A Link to the Past, it would be that the Dark World did not do something like this. Yes, the map is the same, but nobody is supposed to have been in the Dark World in centuries, if not millennia. So the fact Link just has a map does create a lot of ludonarrative dissonance for first-time players that this game avoids. If you take the time to speak with Marin before you head out, she will tell you that Terran has gone to look for mushrooms, but that she would rather sing, regaling Link with the Ballad of the Windfish. This is one of the best Zelda songs of all time for me. The soundtrack this time was composed by Minako Hamano, Kozue Ishikawa, and Kazumi Totaka instead of Koji Kondo or Akito Nakatsuka, but they deliver some pretty standout work, especially with the Game Boy's even more limited sound chip than that of the NES. The Ballad of the Windfish is one of the most complex songs composed for the series at this point, but we'll have to get into that full composition later. Heading north, Link encounters the owl again, who tells him that his goal should be to find a key in the woods here before making his way south to the Tail Cave before he fucks off again. Delving into the woods, the player faces off against moblins that share their design from Zelda 1, along with a new sword-wielding variant that acts similarly to the soldiers from A Link to the Past, all the way down to the sword clinking returning from that game. However, I do have to say that due to the 8-bit sized sprites, the sword clanking in this game feels a lot less fair than how it did in A Link to the Past, with almost no room to sneak in an attack unless the enemy was turned to the side and I could strike at them from the top. Link will also run into this raccoon, who tells Link that thanks to his magic, the Hylian will be lost in the forest. He also tells Link that his nose is sensitive to powders and dust. Heading deeper, Link will end up in a loop that he can't escape from, the tiles of the forest jumbled up in a way that prevents you from finding the key you need to progress the Tail Cave. However, there is this tipped-over log in one of the screens. Heading inside, you are brought into a cave that you must navigate while preventing these tiles from collapsing beneath you. Once out, you can find this mushroom with a mellow aroma that seemingly can't do anything for you. Unless, of course, you played A Link to the Past, where a similar mushroom in a similar forest could be used to create the magic powder by a witch. And if you head this way, you can find a witch's hut where the mistress inside will gladly create you magic powder that Link can use to one-shot several foes along with lighting sconces. However, this isn't the only way to get the magic powder. Back in the trendy game shop, players will see this item, the magic powder, and you can win this and entirely skip the entire opening puzzle, allowing returning players to just jump into Tail Cave and rewarding players who may have seen an item that they didn't have and winning it from the trendy game. Either way, when you sprinkle the magic powder on the raccoon, he will bounce about wildly before turning back into Terran? Back to normal, he tells Link that the last thing he remembers was eating a mushroom before having a strange dream where he was a raccoon. Right, so the red mustachioed man likes eating mushrooms. Now, without his magic blocking the way, the player can head north and finally receive the Tail Key, allowing you to head down south and into Tail Cave. Being the first dungeon in the game, Tail Cave has some pretty big shoes to fill. After all, this is the main draw of this game, given its world map is much smaller than that of A Link to the Past, even if we don't include the Dark World. And it does not disappoint. In the tradition of other first dungeons, this one starts with the choice of multiple rooms, but unlike its predecessors, both of these paths actually lead somewhere. The very first room in the game offers the player two directions, north and west. If the player heads north, they are greeted with even more branching paths along with a Zol and a hardhat beetle. If you head west, you see one more path forward along with two hardhat beetles. If you choose to fight the hardhat beetles in either room, you will realize something that sets them apart from their Link to the Past iterations. These hardhats are immune to damage you can inflict, only able to be pushed back by your sword strikes or with the shield. The goal then must be to push them into these holes present in both rooms, and doing so you are granted with a small key in the room to the west and the ability to press the button in the room to the north. Each room enforces the same lesson. Killing enemies can reward you with keys, encouraging the player to meet every combat challenge they encounter rather than just running away. If you head west, you can also head into this room and open up this chest to grab the compass, an item that now doesn't just point to the boss of each dungeon, but also all of the treasures that are hidden throughout. It also comes with a new feature, a tone that plays that will let the player know if a key is in the room they've entered. This is useful for players who may have avoided fighting the hardhat beetles in the previous rooms once they realize their invulnerability, ensuring that players will fight the enemies the way the developers intended. Following from either of these branching paths, both will lead back into the central chamber for this dungeon, netting the player their third key but preventing forward progress for much of the dungeon thanks to these pits. However, not all of the dungeon is blocked, as you can bomb this wall here and collect a secret seashell if you bought the bombs from the shop keep back in Mabe, and if you defeat these enemies by aligning all of their card suits to the same symbol, you are given the Stone Beak. The Stone Beak is DX's replacement for the Stone Tablet, an item that appeared in the original version and gave the player a hint that was sometimes vital for dungeon progression. In DX, the Stone Beak slots into these owl statues, which are dotted around the dungeon rather than the one that existed in the original game. Some of these hints feel more vital than others, and I do wish that they didn't just directly spell out the solution for you. Even if the hints from Zelda 1 made no sense and the ones in Zelda 2 were way too cryptic, A Link to the Past fixed that with Sahasrahla and his telepathy tiles, giving the player that little nudge they needed without directly spelling it out. The final path will lead you to the dungeon item, but only after you defeat these spiked beetles. They will rush the player and are immune to your sword, meaning you have to use your shield to flip them over and expose their weak spots, similar to the terror pins from A Link to the Past. Now, the game has fed the player enough information by this point for using the shield to be second nature, but the owl hint will just straight up tell you to do this. See, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is way too obvious for a hint and feels like it detracts more than it adds. In A Link to the Past, this same trope wasn't told to the player, it was expressed by giving you an item and showing you an enemy, which was much tighter design in my opinion. With this staircase revealed, Link heads down into the basement. Now, if you've seen my, frankly, bad Zelda 1 video, you'll know that this is not new for the series. In fact, this is where the dungeon items are hidden for most of that game. But Link's Awakening treats it a little differently, and by a little, I mean it has an entire 2D side-scrolling mode. Now, I dogged on Zelda 2 very hard for choosing the 2D platformer mode of play, given Zelda's roots as an anti-Mario, so you might suspect me to do the same thing here. However, I also said that a team of more competent developers can make that style work, and I think the team on Link's Awakening managed that. These sections are always short and to the point, usually only 2 screens long, with a slight platforming puzzle that'll let you get from one point in the dungeon to another. Now, as long as there are no more Mario things, we'll be... Oh, come on. Alright, shake it off. It's fine. Let's just head up and grab the dungeon item. And we can just grab the item. There's no need for a big key like A Link to the Past, which, again, feels somewhat like a downgrade. Getting the big key felt like a reward in its own right, knowing that you now had access to the latter half of the dungeon, since you could unlock these doors with the big keyholes and do new puzzles. Now, the items are just sitting in regular chests, and This is how it was done in Zelda 1 and 2, so it's not like Link's Awakening is really bucking a major convention. I just feel that we lost a little something with this change back to the way things were. Regardless, you move past these blade traps and can collect the first dungeon item. Say hello to the best 2D Zelda item after the Pegasus boots. The Roc's Feather, and for all of my D&D nerds / Middle Eastern mythology fans, yes, it is implied to be that rock, or at least it's spelled the same way. While equipped, Link can now perform a jump that gives him a little speed boost, can avoid enemy attacks, and clear up to 2 tile gaps. It also allows you to jump in the 2D portions, letting the developers make harder platforming puzzles as the game goes on. But if you want to equip it, you have to make the choice between your shield and your sword. That's right, the sword, just like the shield before it, is an equipable item that you sometimes have to forego in order to complete a challenge. For now, we only have to get rid of the shield, but this is still a major loss to our arsenal. In fact, this entire system, invented thanks to the limitations of the Game Boy's hardware, is one of my favorite aspects of this game. Yes, you will later be flipping the menu open and close half a dozen times in the span of a few seconds, but when you're in the flow, you barely even notice it. Even if they could have, I think that the game would suffer if the devs had allowed you to keep your sword and shield along with 2 items. Now equipped with the Roc's Feather, we can cross this gap and collect the boss key, and then cross this gap to fight our first mini-boss, the Spike Roller. Just like his name implies, the Spike Roller will push this massive spiked pillar across the room, and Link must jump over it to avoid taking damage. Given you can tap him twice or just hit him with a spin attack and then a regular attack, it only takes 2 or 3 cycles before he is defeated, and we are introduced to a new feature in Link's Awakening. Whenever you defeat a dungeon's mini-boss, it will spawn a portal in its arena that will take Link back to the beginning of the dungeon and vice versa, saving you from having to backtrack through the entire dungeon if you have to leave for any reason. And while not necessary for Tail Cave, this feature is much appreciated in the later dungeons. After your victory here, you head up and unlock the boss room and are greeted by Moldorm. Okay. In an arena both smaller and seemingly larger than the Tower of Hera's, you can easily chew through Moldorm's health. Unlike its A Link to the Past version, this one will not push you back when you attack a spot that isn't its tail, and its body does not negate your sword from hitting that weak spot, so utilizing some well-placed jump slashes, you won't even get knocked off into the pit containing chained up skeletons below, and you easily win the fight and collect the first of the siren instruments. Let's just hope this boss isn't an indicator of what's to come, because that was potentially the easiest boss in the entire series thus far. Using your new item to easily make your way back to Mabe Village, the player is informed that Madame Meow Meow's chain chomp, Bow Wow, was stolen by some moblins. Though the kids telling you are in such a frenzied panic, they don't do a great job communicating everything to you. Heading to Meow Meow's house, she tells you that Bow Wow has been dognapped and implores you to help get him back. Unsure of where to head next, but knowing that the Roc's Feather has surely opened up new paths, the player heads back north and can collect their 3rd heart piece before heading into this cave and facing off against the swarm of moblins inside. The final challenge before getting Bow Wow back is the moblin boss, who will either fire arrows at Link or charge at him. And while a shield and Roc's Feather combo is great to block damage from his spears or get out of the way of his charges, really, a player with good enough control of the Roc's Feather can pretty easily avoid most of the damage he dishes out. And something like this is going to be a staple from here on out. These inter-dungeon side quests that help break up the monotony of endless dungeon delving and allow the player to actually explore the island. Freeing Bow Wow, the player can return to Madame Meow Meow, but given Bow Wow serves as the only access to Dungeon 2, she will tell the player to take Bow Wow on a walk until you've completed the dungeon. And by now, I'm sure you've noticed something pretty different about Link's Awakening from its predecessors. Not only is it far more linear with all 8 dungeons laid out for you only able to complete them in order, but this game also has a much larger focus on narrative. I praised A Link to the Past story in the previous video, but Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game with a driving narrative that wasn't just tied directly to what the player was intrinsically doing. The people of Mabe are all unique characters with names, a far cry even from the Flute Boy's father or the Dwarf Blacksmiths from A Link to the Past. And as mentioned, they are even wackier than those from A Link to the Past. Every time you come back to Mabe, you are slightly more endeared to the strange quadruplets or Bow Wow or Marin, and the game does a good job making you feel like these characters are an integral part of the quest. Still equipped with Bow Wow, you can clear these objects that were previously blocking your path and unlock the second dungeon, Sans Key. Heading into Bottle Grotto, you may have noticed something. The dungeon theme is not the same as Tail Cave. That's right, the first Zelda game to introduce unique themes for each dungeon wasn't A Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time or even Majora's Mask, but the handheld spin-off made by some guys originally digging around with a dev kit. And while none of these themes are my favorite in the series, the fact they managed to have 8 distinct themes ought to be applauded. Moving past the first room, we encounter a design decision with these dungeons that I do have issues with. I know, not a promising start for Link's Awakening, given this is the second of 8 dungeons, but when the dungeons are like this, shaped like the item they're named after, the design often suffers. They lose that open-ended nature and interconnectivity in favor of maintaining the shape-style design like those in Zelda 1. Not to say that the Bottle Grotto is a bad dungeon, far from it, but I'd say it is a damper on the design from just a dungeon prior in favor of a gimmick that really doesn't do anything for me. The first puzzle requires the player to light these sconces to open the door, utilizing the magic powder just how the witch taught you back when you got it if you did the quest. And if you didn't, this is the point where the game teaches you how to use it, as there is no other path forward. From here, defeat a few enemies and you encounter these block and switch puzzles returning from A Link to the Past. Changed slightly due to the original Game Boy lacking a color display, these switches will change a handful at a time rather than the clear delineation of colors from A Link to the Past, but this rarely, if ever, threw me off even as they continued to appear in dungeon after dungeon, much like A Link to the Past. After completing this switch puzzle with the Roc's Feather, you run into 2 Shy Guys. Anybody else feel like something's up? I'm sure it's nothing. Moving ahead, you encounter the Hinox, another incredibly easy mini-boss that you can take care of in a few sword swipes, though you should watch for him grabbing you, as he does do a full heart of damage, a quarter of your current health. From here, you encounter your first Vacuum Mouth, an enemy that will either suck in or blow out from itself, moving both the player and enemies as it does so. Always accompanied by pits, these enemies are never the most dangerous threat, but are always a slight nuisance no matter how far along the player is. Once past them, the player can fight a pair of boos, whatever. With them defeated, you can finally grab the power bracelet, allowing you to lift heavy objects and get rid of this annoying ass text pop-up whenever you accidentally press against a heavy object. And while I'm on that topic, I should discuss one of Link's Awakening's greatest flaws: the constant and incessant text pop-ups. Every time you get a compass, you are greeted with this text. Every time you touch a heavy object before getting the power bracelet, you are given this text. Every time you run into one of these stones, even after receiving the item needed to clear it, you are given this text. And every time you pick up a piece of power or the Guardian Acorn, you are given this text prompt and the music changes to this jingle. Falling in line with power-up jingles of old, this wouldn't be so bad if the player wasn't rewarded with these items constantly. You get the piece of power after defeating between 40 and 45 enemies, and the Guardian after your 12th consecutive enemy defeated without taking damage. And given they double your damage and half the damage you take respectively, getting one almost always guarantees the second is just on its way. And the jingle is so short and replaces the much better music throughout the game, annoying me to no end, so I usually opt to avoid collecting them, even if they make the game far easier, just so I don't have to deal with that text pop-up and that stupid-ass jingle. And I can understand needing to show the player these text prompts one time. They are important for letting the player know they don't have the item that they need, or what certain items do, but that should flag something in the game to not give the prompt again unless the console is turned off, or something, instead of just constantly appearing throughout the entire game and leading to endless mashing through needless dialogue. Now that at least one of the prompts is vanished, Link can also lift heavy objects like these pots and grab the boss key within this chest and get 50 rupees. Heading into the boss room, you are greeted by Genie, who taunts the player by saying he can't be defeated as long as he has his bottle. And we are met with another change from the original to DX. In the original, Genie's fireballs are considerably faster, making it an actual challenge to dodge him, while the ones in DX are slow as molasses, making it far too easy to avoid damage. Once you've avoided all of his fireballs, Genie retreats back to his bottle, letting the player stun him by hitting it and then doing damage by tossing the bottle on the ground. Repeat 3 times and the bottle breaks, and Genie will begin to float around the room, throwing fire at the player. After another handful of swipes, another snooze-worthy boss is defeated and lets you claim your second siren instrument. Exiting Bottle Grotto, the player is told that their next destination is the prairie, and after returning Bow Wow, you can now use your power bracelet to access this path east that was previously blocked, and one of these paths is one you should definitely take the time to visit. Just above the witch's hut outside of the mysterious forest, the player can find Crazy Tracy's day spa, along with the eponymous Crazy Tracy. Depending on a hidden tracker of the number of enemies killed, Tracy will sell the player her special medicine for either 28 rupees if the number is even, and 42 if the number is odd. Buying the medicine, she lathers Link's body with it and gives us our second strangely provocative healing woman in the Zelda series, and the only way you can revive after death. See, Link's Awakening does not have bottles, so the player cannot just catch a fairy like they could in A Link to the Past. Instead, every time you die, Tracy's medicine will heal you back to full, and you will have to come back here to get a new bottle. And given the game has a secret ending tied to whether the player is ever game overed or not, it is a worthwhile detour to find her spa before making your way back to the prairie. Heading deeper into the prairie, you encounter this guy in a house full of frogs. He says his name is Prince Richard, and that he was the master of Handheld Castle until his servants got tired of him and kicked him out to his villa. Based. He also tells the player that he knows where the key to the Key Cavern is, but he will only reveal it once Link retrieves the 5 golden leaves he accidentally left inside the castle when he fled. You agree, and make your way toward the castle, and when the player arrives, they very well might remember how Link was able to get access to Hyrule Castle in the last game and wrap around the side here. Here you encounter Kiki, the monkey that fleeced you out of 110 rupees in the Dark World in the last game. And that Richard guy from earlier, he's from an obscure Game Boy title called The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls. It's like the further we get into this game, the more shit just gets weirder. I mean, the talking owl was already weird, and so was the talking alligator, whose brother is an artist, but now we've got a talking monkey who appeared in the Dark World in the last game. I guess Koholint's just like that. Anyway, Kiki will only let the player pass if you've completed the first 3 parts of the trading sequence, willing to build them a bridge into Handheld Castle in exchange for the bananas you have on hand. Doing so, he leaves a stick behind that will let you continue the trading sequence later. Cutting down this bush, you make your way inside Handheld Castle, and it acts much like Hyrule Castle did in A Link to the Past, providing a form of mini-dungeon for the player to explore with unique puzzles and combat challenges. In fact, this is the only area in the game where the player can encounter the Ball and Chain Soldier. Slightly buffed from his A Link to the Past appearance, but not enough to provide that much of a challenge. Hell, the Mad Bomber outside the castle caused me more issues because he was just so damn fast. That and the puzzle to get this bird to move and get the dark nuts out of these walls did have me scratching my head for a while because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing. I do like this puzzle where you have to throw a pot at this closed door because it was pretty well telegraphed by having nothing but it and like 8 pots in a room. All in all, Handheld Castle is no Hyrule Castle, but as a mid-dungeon objective, I did find it more engaging than the Moblin Cave. Returning the 5 leaves to Richard, he will move aside this box and let you traverse this maze of bushes and grass to grab the slime key, as long as you've already forked over the 200 rupees to buy the shovel back in Mabe. And if you hadn't, that's kinda on you, because Richard will tell the player to buy a shovel before returning to him when you leave for Handheld Castle. Heading inside Key Cavern, the player is immediately expected to use what Handheld Castle taught you about pots and locking doors to head deeper into the dungeon. From here, it's a straight shot to the next level of the dungeon because the player can't access any of the contents of the rooms to their right at this point, and these rocks can't be lifted by the power bracelet. Here you are given 1 key with which to progress, but are surrounded by 4 doors, prompting the player to pick a direction and hope to find the path deeper into the dungeon. The path north will give the player access to the switch needed to access the goodies back on the first level. The west path is just a trap room that you have to fight out of, and the bottom room will grant you with more bombs, but each of them will give you another key with which to try another door. Only the eastern path leads you further into the dungeon, where you encounter the mini-boss of this dungeon, a pair of Dodongo snakes? I guess a dinosaur was too hard to make look good on a screen this size. Regardless, given you have so many more bombs than Zelda 1 and you can throw them, these 2 are another snooze fest that simply act as an item gate before you can move on. With the Dodongo snakes beaten, the final floor is pretty open-ended, allowing the player to loop through several rooms, collecting more keys they will need to unlock these locked blocks in the center of the room, and grab the Pegasus boots. Acting almost identically to their original iteration, the Pegasus boots' only major downside is taking up an equipment slot. Similarly to the power bracelet, the Pegasus boots were just a part of Link's toolset in A Link to the Past, requiring a prolonged A button press to activate, and the power bracelet has always been an extension of Link ever since the first game. Largely, this change led to me prioritizing another item over the Pegasus boots, chiefly the Roc's Feather, because the speed boost they provide doesn't feel as worth it when the screen transitions happen as often as they do in Link's Awakening. Still, this item does show off a unique feature of the 2-button equipment system. When you enter this room, you are presented with a 3-tile gap, and until you get the Pegasus boots, there is nothing you can do to clear it. But if you have them and the Roc's Feather equipped, you can build up enough momentum to easily clear this jump. And several other items have combos like this that are never told to the player but can be discovered with the right experimentation. Now able to blast through these crystals, the player can make their way through the dungeon, but another element of Condolent Castle makes an appearance. In the previous two, bombable walls were there to hide secrets, not prevent further exploration, but given only 2 of the 4 required keys are in rooms Link can access, the player needs to notice that the wall is cracked on this side before making their way down and bombing it to get the final key. That, or you can search for bombable walls by charging up your spin attack and prodding the wall, doing so to a regular wall tile and you will hear this sound. But if you hit a wall tile that can be bombed, it will change to this. Now, I'm not sure if I read this online somewhere or if through child brain osmosis, I thought this was a feature in A Link to the Past, but it's just not. All of the bombable walls in that game have cracks, but this isn't true for Link's Awakening, and it's nice to have a tool at the player's disposal that isn't just bomb every wall until you find what you're looking for like it was in Zelda 1. The other bombable wall has this massive arrow pointing to it, or you can find another bombable wall in this room that will lead to the same place. Now, maybe this is different when you're playing the original version of Link's Awakening where everything is grayscale, but this arrow in blue on yellow tiles was so clear as to completely eliminate the puzzle. Like, kinda wish we'd had that for the Dark Nuts in Condolent Castle rather than here, or maybe make it more subtle for the director's cut. I don't know. All I know is this barely counts as a puzzle for me. Now, with the boss key and all 4 small keys in hand, the player can gain access to the boss room that is entirely empty save for a voice taunting Link and Zols that will fall from the ceiling. So, you take your new dungeon item and you run into the wall, which causes Slime Eye to fall from the ceiling. After it lands, you will have to slash it with your sword until the pair separate enough for you to ram them again with the Pegasus boots and split them in half. Now, you have a tandem fight, where each strike makes Slime Eyes jump to the ceiling and come crashing back down, stunning the player if they aren't off the ground, potentially leading to the other getting a cheap hit in while the player can't move. I find it's easier to focus on one of them and get rid of it rather than both, just so you can focus on the Roc's Feather timing with only one boss landing at a time. And hey, just like that, another boss has been defeated and another Siren instrument has been claimed. At least this boss was kind of fun as opposed to the first 2, so maybe we're moving in the right direction. With the Pegasus boots, even more of this game's map opens up, and I feel like we're finally ready to discuss the overworld exploration. See, I have issues with linearity in a Zelda game, as I often feel it gets in the way of that original creative vision and replaces it with attempts at spectacle that oftentimes fall flat. But Link's Awakening avoids this by designing its overworld like a Metroidvania. That's right, the other half of my statement from the Zelda 2 script has managed to find new life in Link's Awakening. Every item you collect will unlock a new section of the map you couldn't access before, but also allows for progression in areas you already could access but couldn't explore as deeply. For example, in the Mysterious Forest, there's this rock off to the side in this screen with a pair of moblins. After collecting the sword, you could pass through this section a dozen times, especially if you don't know how to stop the raccoon's magic and not realize it's there. But once you have the power bracelet, you can lift the rock and find the Mad Batter, who won't half the cost of Link's magic this time, since he doesn't have a magic meter, instead offering to increase the amount of magic powder, bombs, or arrows the player can hold, which can be cycled through if you don't want one of the options presented. And this makes the linearity and consistent backtracking less of a slog than other games, simply because the player is presented with more traversal options than they had before, every time, making your return trips around Koholint feel just as exciting as the first time you passed through them. It also helps the flow of the narrative, ensuring the player hits the 2 or 3 major story beats they need before reaching the end of the game. Speaking of, we are told by the owl that the desert should be our next goal, and so you continue east until reaching Animal Village. Much like its name would suggest, the inhabitants of this town are all talking animals who are obsessed with Marin. In fact, they're so in love with her singing that the only way to get this walrus to get out of the way to the desert is to trek back to Mabe Village and grab her. However, this is where another part of the overworld design truly gets revealed to the player. Across Koholint Island, there are 4 warp points, 3 that you can access after getting the Pegasus boots, and 1 that's only available at the end of the game. The first 3 are located in Ukuku Prairie, along with these cliffs above Koholint Castle, and the final one here in Animal Village. Stepping into one will teleport you to the next in a clockwise motion once you've visited another one of the points. This is a major help when backtracking across the island because now you don't need to constantly retread the areas you've explored until you get another dungeon item. Returning back to Mabe Village, one of the quadruplets will tell the player that Marin has gone to the beach, something that she seemingly spends a lot of time doing. So, you trek down to the beach and make your way to the lone alcove without monsters, where you find Marin staring out at the ocean, and in some ways, the player. She asks Link to sit with her, and you share this quiet little cutscene. She tells Link that she has always dreamed of what is beyond Koholint Island, all of the people, places, and experiences that have been held from her on this tiny island, and that Terran has often told her there was nothing beyond the sea. But then she found Link, and he reignited that hope in her heart that there is something else beyond the island with just his presence. She continues by saying that she wants to sing for everyone in the world, free to go where she pleases, just like the seagull circling out over the ocean. And that she wants to learn everything about Link and his world, something that when combined with her saying her heart skipped a beat upon finding the young man washed up on the shore, implies she might have a crush on him. It's hard not to endear yourself to Marin at this point. After all, this amount of dialogue was basically reserved only for Zelda and Sahasrahla in A Link to the Past, but none of their dialogue gave the impression of people with hopes and dreams the way Marin does. Link then asks Marin for her help in waking the walrus, and she agrees, granting Link a traveling companion and a hint that the young man may have feelings for Marin with the text, "Is this your big chance?" From here, you can beeline it straight to Animal Village, or you can basically take Link and Marin out on a date. Mabe Village and the surrounding areas have so many little moments for Link and Marin to just have fun as 2 teenagers, Link's quest momentarily forgotten in exchange for a nice day out with a girl. Some of my favorite moments are only accessible if you've spoken with the photographer just south of Tall Tall Heights, allowing the player to capture moments of their journey and hold on to them. However, you can't actually get all of the pictures on one save. You can get 11 out of the 12, but the first photo you take actually has 2 outcomes depending on if the player says yes or no to the photographer's question. My favorite, other than jumping down the well, is when you take Marin in front of the weather vane, and it's very clear from Link and Marin's disgruntled expressions, Terran's barging in on an otherwise romantic picture is not appreciated. Combined with Marin's flavor text when performing certain actions, like her criticizing your playing of the ocarina if you have it, or the rare chance she has to enjoy seeing Link attack a cuckoo, it gives Marin so much more depth than any of the other characters in the series by this point. Especially since her actions up until this point align with what we are shown in-game. She was the one to find Link washed up on shore because she frequently treks to the beach, and her desire to sing for everyone is demonstrated by her always singing for Link when given the chance, and her popularity as a singer in Animal Village. Ultimately, your trek takes you back to Animal Village, where everyone treats Marin like a celebrity, with Chef Bear even disappointed that Link is tagging along while Marin's around. With her help, the player unlocks access to Yarna Desert and the Angler's Key after defeating a land mola. In some ways, this boss fight is easier than that of A Link to the Past, with there only being one of them and it not shooting rocks when it emerges, but given the quicksand on the floor that pulls the player down and restarts the fight can only be avoided by jumping, and the land mola can still hit the player in the air, it feels like a fair substitute for that previous duel. Now equipped with the Angler's Key, Link can unlock access to the dungeon, but he can't get in from this vantage point. In fact, given we don't have a set of flippers, Link can't even walk down to one of these staircases and swim to the dungeon. No, now we must scale Telltale Heights and leap down from this dried up waterfall because it's video game law that if you put a waterfall in your game that the player can access, there must be something hidden behind it. Not that that thing is going to be any good. Angler's Tunnel, while providing an interesting soundscape that differs largely from other water levels in video games, is not a challenging dungeon in the slightest. The combat challenges are lacking, its mini-boss is laughably easy, and it has one puzzle in the entire dungeon. And that single puzzle is undercut by the fact that this room shows you the order in which you need to touch the tiles, meaning once you have the dungeon item, the flippers, you're done, because this is the worst boss in a lineup of mediocre bosses. Everyone say hello to the angler. Okay, now everyone say goodbye to the angler. I don't know who designed this boss, if they felt they needed a side-scrolling section so the flippers could be used to defeat the boss the way that every other boss has needed an item to beat, but like, fuck, man. I beat him in 6 seconds and took no damage. I think the fish are supposed to act as a hindrance, potentially dealing damage to the player and maybe blocking your sword swings, but I'll never know because he died so fast. And with that, we've got our 4th Siren's instrument and have officially hit the halfway point for this game. Told next to head to the bay, Link now has access to all the waterways in Koholint and another heart piece and this cave. Inside, you'll meet Monbo, who will teach you a mambo for your ocarina.
Trumpet. A little bit of Monica in my life.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Mambo's Mambo is another mode of fast travel for Link, letting him instantly warp to Crazy Tracy's day spa from anywhere on the island and letting the player warp back to the start of a dungeon they're in, something you will be doing a lot of in the latter half of the game. Once you touch land, you will also begin to be harassed by a ghost who prevents you from entering any dungeons, meaning we have to find a way to deal with this guy and get rid of this annoying-ass jingle. Look, I'm one of the people who actually enjoys this quest for some thematic stuff we'll get into later, but this jingle is fucking unacceptable, man. It plays every time you transition screens, and given Link's Awakening does that with the same frequency as Zelda 1, you will be hearing it every 10 seconds. Thankfully, the way to put him to rest is rather simple. You must take him to the dilapidated house by Tarambo Shore and allow him to see what's happened to his home before returning to his grave. Another added moment in DX is that if you return to this grave later, the photographer will snap a picture of Link and the ghost together by his grave. The entrance to Catfish's Maw is entirely open now that you have the flippers and the ghost has been dealt with, so heading inside, we are once again presented with a linear path forward before the dungeon opens up into a much larger beast. The path to the first small key will lead to this platforming section that acts as a physics puzzle, asking the player to weigh down one side to raise and lower the platforms while not lowering one so far as to fail to jump. The key itself is not hard to get a hold of, kill some enemies and finish this block puzzle and it falls down. But it's this next room that's of interest to us. On the floor is a giant skull, a boss or mini-boss arena indicator if I've ever seen one, along with 4 blocks in the corners of the room. However, there is no mini-boss, no taunting, nothing, so the player heads back out into the main body of the dungeon. Here, they will encounter the mini-boss Master Stalfos, who takes his design almost entirely from the Stalfos Knights of A Link to the Past. Striking his head, Master Stalfos will collapse, and the player must then do damage to him with bombs. Now, for a player at this point, this should be something they can figure out pretty easily through trial and error if they didn't have prior knowledge. But DX added this owl statue outside of the boss room that tells the player to bomb a skeleton they can't destroy with their sword. This is one of the few added hints that I find useful rather than superfluous, because up until this point, all the other Stalfos can be beaten with just the sword, and the player may think they are missing something otherwise. However, before you can defeat him, Master Stalfos flees the fight, and the player continues deeper to find the chest that would normally contain the dungeon's item is empty, with a note from Master Stalfos saying he stole it. This opens up a manhunt for the mini-boss across the whole dungeon, and rewards the attentive player. See, in the first fight with Master Stalfos, the floor is the same as the first one we found, but this room only has 1 block in the corner, so if you enter another room and find it has 3 blocks, you know to head back and continue your hunt for the room with 2 blocks until you loop back to the beginning and to finally defeat the coward and grab the hookshot. Now you can collect all of these items that you missed, the final small key, the boss key, and fight off the second, optional mini-boss, Goma. Following the design from Zelda 1, Goma will move from side to side before stopping and opening its central eye, and letting the player use the hookshot, bombs, or the bow to damage it before closing its eye again. It will also shoot fireballs at the player or charge them, meaning the player can't just wait directly in front of it to get in cheap shots. It also, thankfully, does not die in one hit like its Zelda 1 iteration, so this mini-boss is already better than the original boss fight, a first for this game. The boss key itself is hidden beneath this patch of water located in the middle of the dungeon and can actually be found before you defeat Master Stalfos, but you can only grab it now that you have the hookshot to pull this bridge over to you. Now you are ready to face the boss. You hookshot your way across this gap and are met with yet another mediocre boss fight. On paper, the slime eel seems like a cool boss, with its tail breaking through the floor and swinging around the room while the player is forced to avoid it and hookshot the eel's head to pull it from the wall. In practice, you can camp these corners and just wait for its head to pop out above you and wail on it 2 or 3 times before it's dead without ever being in danger. I get that allowing the tail to swing into the corners here would make it feel like there's no reprieve, but it should do that. This is the 5th dungeon in the game. We are solidly past the halfway point, and we have not had a single boss that approaches the difficulty of the Armos Knights from A Link to the Past, let alone the bosses of Zelda 1 or, hell, Adventure of Link. Especially given pulling its head from the wall will stop the tail dead in its tracks, the player just gets to wail on it, much like the angler, and not have to worry about taking any damage. This is 2 bosses in a row that feel like filler, and if we're being frank, it's not going to get much better as we continue. With the 5th instrument in hand, it's time to find the face key to gain access to the 6th dungeon. But now that we can complete both, I think it's time to finish off the trading sequence and our hunt for the secret seashells. We had last left off with Link collecting a stick from Kiki the monkey, an item that you can give to Terran so he can try to get this beehive off this tree. It goes poorly for him, granting Link the honeycomb he needs to trade with Chef Bear for a pineapple. From here, your trek up to the entrance into Angler's Tunnel will reveal Popple, lost in the mountains, just like he said he would be, in desperate need of food. Giving him the pineapple, Popple will hand over a hibiscus and thanks Link for saving him. This hibiscus can be given to Christine the goat at Animal Village in exchange for a letter addressed to Mr. Wright, who lives near the mysterious forest. Bringing him the letter, you were greeted by a man with a striking resemblance to Dr. Wright, the player's advisor in SimCity for the SNES. Handing over the letter, you see a real on-screen catfishing scheme going on with Christine pretending to be Princess Peach. In return, Mr. Wright will give Link a broom, since it's the only thing he has. This broom can be given to Grandma Yahoo back in Mabe Village, and she will trade you a fishing hook she swept up as thanks for the sick new tool. With the fishing hook, you can swim under this bridge and give it to the fisherman, who promises Link he will hand over his next catch, which just so happens to be a mermaid's necklace. Swimming up, you give this mermaid back her necklace in exchange for one of her scales. This scale is needed to finish the statue in Martha's Bay, only accessible by hookshot, and reveals the magnifying glass. This item is what you need to read the book about Koholint's dangerous secrets in Mabe Village, giving the player the path to the final boss, which, while technically unnecessary, is sure to save the player hours of time. And it also grants you access to the best weapon in the game, the boomerang. Now, I know, the boomerang has never been the best weapon in these games. Its 8-way firing direction has been great in both Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past, but it could only kill weak enemies and stun others, even when upgraded. Untrue for the boomerang of Link's Awakening, as they have had that man on a creatine bulk for the last 2 years that lets it shred through enemies. Genuinely. This item allows you to one-shot the final phase of the final boss. It is that powerful. It also allows the player to turn bubbles into fairies, something that helps as the dungeons get harder and harder. The secret seashells will grant the player a reward at the 5th, 10th, and 20th shell collected. The first 2, only accessible if you have exactly 5 and 10 shells, are another secret seashell, helping lessen the scope of your search, but the one at 20 is really worth it. With 20 or more secret seashells, Link can turn them in for the Koholint sword, acting just like the Master Sword did in A Link to the Past, right down to the sword beam at full health. It's also likely at this point you have just gotten enough rupees to afford the outright egregious price of 980 rupees for the bow from this shop. Or you can just steal it. Yeah, that's right. Link's Awakening allows you to just rob this man blind, though all of the NPCs will call you thief for the rest of the game, and the shopkeep will shoot you to death with lightning if you ever come back. But if you're cool with those stipulations, yeah, takes a bit of trial and error, but you could totally just steal this man's inventory. And frankly, fuck him. 980 rupees for the bow? That's insane. More equipped than ever, the player must travel to this point above the animal village and work their way through this maze of Armos, all of whom are invincible unless shot with the bow, part of the reason we stopped for it earlier. Working your way up, you eventually enter the shrine and are confronted by an Armos Knight. Now, A Link to the Past veterans might expect this guy to be a pushover. After all, he only took 3 shots from the bow to kill last time, but this guy has been on the same regimen as the boomerang. Sword slashes do nothing to him, unless the player charges a spin attack or dashes with the Pegasus boots, both of which put you directly into danger from his massive attacks, especially since he will do the ground pound that the Slime Eyes did that can stun the player. Even equipped with the bow, he takes several shots before going down, though his challenge is significantly lessened if you have it. Beating him grants access to the face key, and the final room of the shrine. Lighting these sconces, the player is greeted by a stone tablet at the top of the room. Reading it reveals that the island of Koholint is nothing but an illusion, a scene on the lid of a sleeper's eye, and that waking the dreamer, the windfish will erase all of Koholint and its inhabitants like a bubble on the end of a needle. Now, I've been coy about this reveal the entire time. After all, it's an open secret that Link's Awakening, called Dreaming Island in the original Japanese, takes place in a dream. It explains why everyone on Koholint is so bizarre and why so many elements from other series outside of Zelda have seemingly made their way into this adventure. And while the owl tries to reassure Link that no one but the windfish can know if the mural is true, the fact that an owl is depicted alongside the windfish does a lot to make the player not trust him. That, and every boss you've been fighting shares the title Nightmare, something I intentionally left out of the script this whole time to help preserve this twist for the 4 of you out there who didn't know about this twist going into the video. Now, of course, the "it was all a dream" trope is often unsatisfying, but I find that it's only unsatisfying as the answer to a question about the nature of the narrative. Like FNAF Dream Theory, that would have been an unsatisfying conclusion because it means that nothing was real. But Link's Awakening takes this and flips it on its head. It makes the fact that this is a dream integral to the entire story, planting the seeds of doubt in the player by broadcasting everywhere that something is off. Hell, the Dream Shrine in Mabe Village literally has you complete a dungeon in your sleep. It isn't the answer, it's a new kind of question. After all, if the windfish is the one dreaming all of this up, then why are elements of Link's past making an appearance on Koholint? It also calls into question the stakes of this entire quest. I mean, from the jump, Link and the player's goal has been to wake the windfish and escape Koholint Island. But if that means erasing everyone who has ever been, should you do it? Sure, everyone here is just a part of a dream, an illusion conjured by the windfish, but didn't you feel for Marin? Didn't you go on a quest to save Bow Wow, to help Mr. Right find love for his hobby again, to help put this man's soul to rest? If those people were nothing more than a dream, then why did helping them feel good? And is it your place to erase all of this so you can get back to your life? And these questions stick with the player as they head into the Face Shrine, complemented wonderfully by this piece of music. Quiet, constant, and contemplative, the Face Shrine theme is the second best piece of music in this game and heightens the reveal of Koholint Island's reality beautifully. It is slightly discordant, creating a feeling of unease in the player as they head into the winding halls of the Face Shrine. Shaped like a giant head, the Face Shrine falters slightly for me with the constant use of looping halls and stairways rather than interesting design, much like Bottle Grotto or the opening of Key Cavern. While it serves as a wonderful companion to that reveal, leaving the player just as disoriented as Link, this feels more like one of Zelda 2's dungeons than something from this game. It is largely open-ended, but without a guide or your own knowledge of where to go, the player will constantly be backtracking from one end of the dungeon to the other. Thankfully, Mondo's Mambo will save some of that time, but not enough to make this dungeon not feel frustrating as you go from one end to grab a key, unlock this door, realize you can't progress, wonder how you get to the dungeon item, find the upgraded power bracelet, come back, and then loop through this hall wondering where to go and what to do. And we've seen this style of dungeon done right before in this game back on the final floor of Key Cavern. This central room allows the player a known point to return to while making exploration only 1 or 2 rooms deep, rather than the 4 or 5 of this dungeon, making backtracking far less of a chore. It also doesn't help that the enemies in this dungeon are such a pain. Returned are the Wizrobes, a staple at this point, and just like every other Zelda game, they act differently this time. No longer able to be beaten by the sword, your best option is to use bombs to kill them in one hit, either through precise timing or using the boomerang to stun them, or you can waste 4 arrows shooting them with the bow. Neither of these options is well telegraphed to the player, leading to a slog of trial and error where messing up can cost you 2 hearts if they hit you. They also teleport in and out much faster than in A Link to the Past, making the use of bombs far more challenging than it ought to be. Thankfully, by this point, you could have found all of 3 of the Mad Batter's hiding spots and have hopefully fully upgraded capacity for bombs, arrows, and magic powder, meaning you aren't likely to run out of resources, but that doesn't mean you can't, especially since they respawn so frequently and are in rooms where you have to kill them to progress. And one of the only puzzles in this dungeon is in the form of these chess pieces that you can pick up and throw. Seemingly at random, they will land upright and let you through arbitrarily, if you've never played chess before. Now, if you've played chess before, you can recognize these as knights. Cool. So the answer to this puzzle is to ensure that you can throw them in such a way that they have an unblocked L shape. It's really not that hard, and all of the complaints I've heard about them boil down to people never interacting with one of the oldest games still played. The nightmare at the end of this labyrinth is Facade, who is a giant face on the floor and you have to drop bombs on, equip the Rock's Feather, and leap past the shit he throws at you, and we come to another dissatisfying end to a frustrating dungeon that works thematically, but not as a playable experience. Our final 2 dungeons both take place in Telltale Heights, much like A Link to the Past having both of its final dungeons set on the Dark Worlds version of Death Mountain. However, neither of the paths forward can be accessed by the player at this point because this won't stop spitting fire, and this pit can't be bridged by any of their available items. The path forward is largely for the player to discover, with this guy who looks suspiciously like Luigi being the only real hint as to what you're expected to do. See, back in Mabe Village, you can move the weather vane to discover the remains of this village's mysterious flying bird. But neither of your Ocarina songs at this point does anything. Instead, you need to complete this sign maze south of Key Cavern where you find Wart from Super Mario Bros. 2 with his original name from Doki Doki Panic. Far friendlier than in his home game, which was also in a dream, Mamu will teach the player the last Ocarina song for 300 rupees, bringing Link's total spent for this game to a whopping 1,480 rupees for this adventure, and the Hero of Legends running total up to 3,610 rupees. I'm gonna be real, this guy has 2 more adventures we'll be getting to later, and I really doubt another Link is going to beat this number, even if the Hero of Legend doesn't have to spend any more rupees. This new song is well worth it though, because it has the power to bring dead things back to life. And playing it in front of the pile of bones will call the soul of the flying rooster back to its body, which grants you access to this key and entrance into the best dungeon of this game, Eagle's Tower. Much has been said about this dungeon, and pretty much everyone is in consensus that this is the best dungeon in the game for a reason. The core gimmick for this dungeon is to break these massive stone pillars that are keeping the 4th floor aloft with this steel ball. The first pillar goes down easily, but that's so the dungeon can teach the player about this mechanic. From here, the challenge comes down to navigating through this space with the steel ball and Link unable to take the same routes into a new area. Combined with a series of switch puzzles, a shake-up to the Hinox mini-boss that makes him actually somewhat of a challenge, and a series of bomb puzzles, and this dungeon easily jumps to the top of the list of dungeons. Knocking down the final pillar, the tower collapses, bringing parts of the 4th floor down into the 3rd floor and changing the layout from what you might have explored before. Making your way through, you were confronted by the Grim Creeper if you hadn't already beaten him, and we are given yet another boring mini-boss. He sends his brothers swarming the player, and you can super easily dispatch all of them, leading him to pull a Master Stalfos and run away. I don't know what's up with this game and the theme of cowardly mini-bosses, but it's certainly a strange decision. Anyway, flipping this switch and grabbing the Nightmare Key, you can make your way out to the top of the tower and face off against the Evil Eagle and the Grim Creeper combined together. Now, this boss is supposed to knock you off with wind attacks and feathers and restart the fight like Moldorm, but with the Covalent Sword, he's such a joke. This is the third boss in the game that I have just wailed on and faced no negative repercussions. The fourth if you want to include that Moldorm fight. Genuinely, I cannot impress enough that I have struggled more with the Landmola and Moldorm from A Link to the Past, a game I can beat in my sleep, than with any of Link's Awakening's bosses, including this penultimate one. Honestly, grabbing the Organ of Evening Calm barely feels like a reward at this point. The final dungeon has no inter-dungeon quest, but we're going to be taking one. See, the DX version of Link's Awakening added one final dungeon to the game as a bit of extra side content to entice someone to buy the game if they might have already bought the original version. Accessible once you get the Pegasus boots by knocking this book from the top shelf, the Color Dungeon is open for more than half the game, assuming Link is not accompanied by Marin, Bow Wow, the Ghost, or the Flying Rooster. And this dungeon hides one of the best upgrades in the game. However, the Color Dungeon is easily the worst in the entire game. Focused entirely on the color gimmick, this dungeon's puzzles barely count. I mean, hitting these guys and throwing them into color-coded holes does nothing to stump me, and changing all of these from red to blue only serves as a challenge in this one room. The giant Buzz Blob and Decudon are both jokes, and so is the hard-hit beetle that serves as the final boss for this dungeon. For the Buzz Blob, you just hit him with magic powder before attacking, and the Decudon takes 2 bombs before he's dead, but at least they put up a fight. The hard-hit beetle came from the Angler School of boss difficulty because he just stands there and lets you wail on him until he explodes. After this, Link is presented with 2 options for an upgrade. The Red Tunic, which will double his attack, allowing you to either entirely ignore the Covalent Sword or become a death-dealing monster that can shred through bosses in no time, or the Blue Tunic, which will buff Link's defense. Since I already had the Covalent Sword and did not want the damage upgrade to color my perception of the next dungeon and the final boss, I chose the Blue Tunic and then returned to Telltale Heights prepared to face the final challenge this game had to throw at me. Making your way to the top, you find Marin stuck on a bridge, begging someone to save her after monsters abandon her there. Firing the hookshot, the player swoops in and pulls her to the other side, where she thanks Link for his bravery and tells him that she had come this way to try and wake the Windfish before she was attacked. She also goes to tell Link something that she seems to need to work up the courage for before Terran arrives and ruins the moment. Once again thanking Link before returning back to Mabe Village, the player never does find out what Marin was going to say, but given we know that she hoped praying to the Windfish would allow her to leave the island just like the seagulls, perhaps she was going to ask Link to take her with him once he left the island, or maybe even confess to him, but sadly, we'll never know. Now equipped with a mirror shield collected from Eagle's Tower, the player can press ahead and reach Turtle Rock. Playing Mamu's song once more, the stone will crack open and reveal a giant turtle head that will attack the player, but like all the other bosses in this game, a few strikes from the Covalent Sword and your access to Turtle Rock is opened. Turtle Rock is yet another non-linear dungeon similar to the Face Shrine, shaped like its namesake, but unlike the Face Shrine, this dungeon is a testament to non-linear dungeon design done right. The player is presented with a plethora of paths straight from the get-go, and if you want to explore every part of the dungeon, it's gonna make you work for it. There are 7 small keys hidden across the dungeon, but only 4 are needed to make it to the final nightmare if you know where you're headed. However, given this dungeon hides the final piece of heart and the final warp point, it would be worthwhile for you to make your way to the north in order to check those 2 off before wrapping up, especially if you don't have the Blue Tunic and find yourself in short supply of health. And don't think that it won't be, because this dungeon has 6 mini-bosses scattered about. Most are repeats or ones we've seen before, with the Hynox, Spike Roller, Smasher, Dodongo Snakes, and Hydrosaur making a final return before the last curtain call. Each of these mini-bosses will block Link's progression in one way or another, usually by blocking access to a key he needs in a different room, or a path from one end of the dungeon to the other. The only new mini-boss is Blano, a boxer who can only be hit after he does a flurry of attacks. This makes him slightly harder than most of the other mini-bosses by the sheer fact that the player can't just instantly shred him to ribbons, but still not enough to make this a satisfying fight, especially since you have to beat him to grab the magic rod. Acting almost identically to the fire rod from A Link to the Past, the magic rod will shoot a bolt of fire that can light faraway sconces and melt the ice in these platforming sections to get Link into the final Nightmare Arena and face off against Hothead. Do I even need to say anything about Hothead at this point? I mean, sure, he does 2 hearts of damage, even with the blue tunic, but I killed this guy on accident. Like all of the previous bosses, he is weak to the magic rod and will be stunned when you hit him. But I guess someone forgot to give him any form of invincibility frames, because you can just spam fire into him until he dies in 2 or 3 cycles. Hell, I found the Gibdos and Vyres found in this dungeon a greater challenge, and they are just regular enemies. With the final instrument in hand, it's time to wake the Windfish. Sure, you can take a moment to say your goodbyes, with Marin having unique dialogue if you speak to her after rescuing her, but no matter what you do, the end of the game has been waiting for you from the start. Trekking up Tall Tall Heights one last time, you pull out your ocarina and play the Ballad of the Windfish, and I finally get to talk about this song in its entirety. You hear this song every time you go to speak with Marin, as she will begin singing it after the player finishes speaking with her. It is also present in the opening title theme as Marin approaches Link. You can also hear snippets of it every time you collect another siren instrument, and its melody acts as the base for a minor key remix that acts as the Face Shrine's core melody. The Game Boy did not have a powerful sound chip. This is clear if you listen to the song on modern hardware. The high notes become almost piercing at points, but coming out of a Game Boy speaker, this melody is clear and recognizable anywhere because it had nothing else to supplement it. A duet between Marin singing and Link on the ocarina, accompanied by running arpeggio from the other instruments, the Ballad of the Windfish manages to pull emotions out of me every time I hear it. It is ingrained in this game's identity, and it has to be to achieve this moment atop the mountain. It's just one of those moments that sticks with you, especially since this game began the trend of the musical MacGuffin that would become a staple later on. Hell, all of the music in this game is wonderful, as I'm sure you've noticed by me having more than 8 songs to pick from this retrospective compared to the others. Finishing the performance, the egg cracks open and the owl returns to tell Link that the Windfish awaits and to enter the egg. Doing so, you are greeted with stone walls and a pit down into a labyrinth with seemingly no end, perhaps no greater sign that the world of the dream is getting more warped and strained the closer we get to the dreamer. The only true path forward is to know the path shown to the player in the library in Mabe Village, and given this game will randomize the path each time, you do need to find the magnifying glass to have any hope of making your way to the final boss, the Shadow Nightmare. While Link's memories have clearly been affecting Koholint throughout the adventure, there is no greater crystallization of Link's fears than this boss. Its first phase has it seemingly take the shape of an invincible Zol, impervious to all of Link's attacks save for the magic powder. That's right, even here, at the end of all things, the magic powder is still finding uses in the final boss fight. Its second phase sees it take the form of Aghanim, sporting the same attack pattern as he had in A Link to the Past, sans the easily avoidable lightning. The third phase is yet another fight with Moldorm, and he goes down as easily as all the other times, even if he is faster and has more health. The fourth phase has the Nightmare take the form of Ganon in his second phase, where he spawns flaming bats and hurls his trident at Link. The only way to damage him is with a spin attack or a dash attack, and while not that great of a challenge, I love this stage of the fight purely for the characterization it gives to Link. The Windfish should have no way of knowing about Aghanim or Ganon, making it solidly Link's fears of these two coming back that spawns them. And given what his previous adventures in the timeline say happened, it's not like this is exactly an unfounded fear. And the final stage of the fight is Eram. Wait, hold on. If you're here, what happened to the Nightmare?
Good night, normal NPC. Good night, the roaring night. Good night, image fraud. Good night, Eve. Wait, who the fuck are you?
Okay. That was odd. I'm sure it means nothing.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
Anyway, the penultimate phase says it's a land mola, but it bears no resemblance to that boss unless you really squint and want to say this thing is bug-like. Quickly dash about the room, but one good spin attack and he's dead. The final phase of the fight is Deathful, with the boss growing 2 giant arms that will spin around the room, slowly going out of time as the player wails in the boss's eye. Or you can just one-tap it with the boomerang, bringing an end to the nightmares for good. And really, Shadow Nightmare is an encapsulation of all of the bosses that came before it. The atmosphere is impeccable, the use of 6 phases makes it memorable, but it just does not live up to the hype. Sure, it's a better boss than Ganon in Zelda 1, but it fails to live up to your one-on-one duel with Shadow Link from Adventure of Link, or that final battle against Ganon from A Link to the Past, because it lacks any true difficulty. And this is true for every boss and mini-boss before it. I died several times while filming all of my other Zelda videos, but never once did I die while playing Link's Awakening. And that's because its combat encounters lack the bite of previous titles, which I find to be a massive detriment. Its puzzles are generally great, with the Metroidvania-style backtracking and game-long trading sequence being a brilliant way to cap off this game and making the Nightmares defeat an effort won by your helping every person you can. I just wish that it was a bit harder to win. Climbing the final staircase, the owl will reveal that he was the guardian of the Windfish's dream, and failed in his mission of protecting him before thanking Link and vanishing to be replaced by the Windfish himself. What follows, I feel, needs to be read verbatim.
I am the Windfish. Long has been my slumber. In my dreams, an egg appeared and was surrounded by an island, with people, animals, an entire world. But verily it be the nature of dreams to end. When I dost awaken, Koholint will be gone. Only the memory of this dreamland will exist in the waking world. Someday thou may recall this island. That memory must be the real dream world. Come, Link. Let us awaken together.
Link does as he's commanded, playing the Ballad of the Windfish again, and we watch as Koholint Island and all of its people vanish. And then Link awakens, adrift on a plank to solemnly stare up at the sky until the Windfish flies overhead and a smile lights up the young man's face. Then the game goes to credits, but if you completed the game without dying, there is one more key change from the original to DX. In the original, Marin will fly by on a pair of wings, but in DX, you were greeted by the Ballad of the Windfish yet again before Marin's face appears, fading away to be replaced by a seagull. I like this ending a lot more because it implies that maybe the Windfish did hear Marin's cries and grant her the wish of being a seagull, free to fly and sing wherever she pleases. As I hope I've illustrated, the story of this game is leagues ahead of its predecessors, with a few clear and apparent themes without me having to stretch nearly as hard as I did for A Link to the Past and its narrative elements. Link's Awakening directly confronts the nature of nostalgia and escapism for its entire runtime. Setting Koholint in a dream world allows for the player to get lost in the quirky and offbeat characters that the game's directors said they wanted to feel like extras off of Twin Peaks, in a way that other Zelda games could never achieve. Link's adventure feels more like an island vacation at times than it does a grand quest, likely due to this game foregoing series staples like Ganon, the Triforce, and even Zelda herself. Yet, the whole time, your goal is to escape, to awaken the Windfish and get back to reality, back to Hyrule and the people Link has dedicated himself to protect. And yet everyone, from Terran to the Fisherman, to Mr. Right, to fucking Grandma, Yahoo, or the Quadruplets, have several chunks of dialogue dedicated to them, all of who you see get wiped away in the end cutscene. And, of course, it would be nothing without Marin. From the opening title, she is the first person we see, and with the secret ending, she is also the last. Her wants, her dreams, are what really make the player pause and ask if waking Link up is truly worth it in the end. And it is her song that the player must play to do so. She tells Link to practice it every day to ensure that she remains in his heart even after he wipes away everyone she's ever known and loved. Genuinely, the ending of this game is the most moving ending to a Game Boy game and might be my favorite ending to any of the games thus far, even if A Link to the Past is a close second. While nothing may have been real, all an illusion cast by a higher power, all of the events, the memories of those things, they are important, but you must let them go and become memories. And that's why I love the ghost so much. Taking him back to his house, he reminisces about his nostalgic memories, saying it looks the same as it did, even though it's clearly fallen into disrepair. No one remembers him, and even when you take a photo at his grave, you don't learn his name. He is just the ghost, because he never let go of his nostalgia. He never chose to wake the windfish and get on with his life, stagnating in this memory forever. The final message is an odd one for a video game, one that tells the player to go outside and live rather than live on in a game world, but honestly, it's a message more gamers should follow, myself included. But at the same time, it tells them that those memories, those good times, should be carried on, because even if it only felt real, a fiction can impact us in ways just as poignant as reality. All in all, I would say Link's Awakening has jumped up massively for me in terms of quality. While I found combat clunkier due to the adaptation of Link's moves from A Link to the Past into an 8-bit package, it still feels good because of that solid foundation. Most of the dungeons were standouts, but there were a few massive misses in that lineup. The music was amazing, but was constantly getting interrupted by this stupid power-up theme. The trading sequence is my favorite in the series, but the locations of some of the secret shells and heart pieces made me want to die. The story was phenomenal, but the bosses that halted that progression were the worst in the series. I just don't know how to feel about all of it put together when I take a look at it objectively. But I do know how it made me feel subjectively. This game moved me far more than a Game Boy game had any right to. It produced music that has broken into my top 20 Zelda songs of all time. It made me laugh out loud a couple of times. It made me feel for the island of Koholint and its inhabitants, and for that, it easily lands itself as the second best 2D Zelda experience thus far. And with that, I've been Flartman50, and this has been my retrospective of Link's Awakening. Don't look at that runtime. This is the end of the video. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, that whole deal. You know the drill. Have you ever had a dream that stuck with you? And not the desire for something or a vision of the future, I mean a dream. I have. But have you ever tried to recreate that dream? I have. See, that's the funny thing about memory. It isn't as firm as we'd like to believe. No, memory is actually highly variable to outside factors and can even be changed entirely under the right circumstances. So what happens when you try to recreate the memory of a remixed and recompiled memory? You're basically photocopying a photocopy. Things can seem largely the same, but there's always a flaw. Something slightly different. Something your mind now associates with that dream that influences this new one. Eventually, the original dream is no longer the focus at all, and you're in a jumbled mess of new ideas that are interesting on their own, but not quite the same. Sorry, that was a weird tangent. This video isn't about dreams. It's a retrospective on The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake. Our story now takes us to 2019, far further than even our 1998 release for DX, and a lot of innovation has been made to Zelda in that time. Innovation we won't be getting into right now. We've got to talk about the game. The game opens with a cutscene, fully animated this time, with Link caught in the midst of a storm unlike any his small sailboat could handle. Link fights the waves and winds before he is struck by lightning and his boat explodes. He washes ashore on a beach, and I'm not doing this. The core of this remake is, by and large, the same as the original. It's the same story, same dungeons, same characters, same world. So we're not running over this again. Instead, we're investigating what changes were made and how that affects that original core. Front and center, you will notice the new art style with all of the characters looking somewhat like Funkos with their big heads, little bodies, and blank faces. I know, at the time, the game caught some flack for this style, but if you look at the photos from DX, they kind of really faithfully adapted this style for the overworld sections. It also helps clearly delineate between the dream world and the real world we see in the opening and ending cutscenes. This style also fits the more laid-back scale of this adventure, especially given we were smack in the middle of the wild era Zeldas and their art direction dominating the cultural landscape. So I think this style really helped set it apart in a way that might have only been able to replace it if they had done an entire sprite rework of the game. And maybe that would have helped with the frame rate, because holy shit, this game dips like bad. Gone is the scrolling of the original screen transitions, instead giving us a seamless overworld that just can't seem to render with this lighting sometimes. It's especially bad in a Cuckoo Prairie and this part of Mabe Village because there's so much grass on screen at the same time. And given this section of Mabe Village is front and center, a new player is going to immediately see the game struggling to hit its frame rate target and might worry how this will bode for the rest of the game. Thankfully, the dungeons still rely on screen transitions, so I never experienced any frame rate drops there, so the core of the game isn't too badly affected, but the overworld definitely gets dicey. And while the frame rate doesn't drop, this style does introduce another issue in the dungeons. Now, every bombable wall has these giant cracks that made my eyes roll the first time I saw them. That was half of the challenge in most of these dungeons, determining which wall was bombable in order to progress, but now, none of these puzzles exist because you have a giant crack texture running along the side of each and every wall that can be bombed. The remake has also opted to boost the number of heart pieces and seashells to collect from 12 and 26 to 32 and 50, taking what was a very tight experience where the collectibles felt valuable because of their scarcity and ballooning it into a hunt for items with a sensor. And if the game had added an additional upgrade at the end of the hunt for the secret seashells and kept the covalent sword at 20, it wouldn't be so bad, but it now forces you to collect 40 in order to get the covalent sword. Thank God for the color dungeon so I could at least go grab the red mail. And this problem is worsened with heart pieces. In the original, Link would always enter Tail Cave with 3 hearts, and the challenge was built around that health pool. In the remake, you can enter with 4 hearts and be well on your way to a 5th, even if you didn't get a heart container from beating Moldorm. And putting aside the fact that he looks like a giant cheeseburger, they did try to make Moldorm more threatening by having a period where his tail closes after it's struck and preventing Link from just slicing through its body, but it's still way too easy to beat him. And this is true for all of the bosses. Almost all of them have been revamped in some way to make them more of a challenge. Hell, Angler now at least swims around his arena, but all of them still rank among the easiest in the series, especially given you can get so many more hearts compared to the original game. A few of the mini-bosses were tweaked as well, but save for Blano, who did genuinely surprise me with this hit, it felt like fighting slightly faster versions of mini-bosses who had previously put me to sleep. The only thing I found that supplemented the game's sudden lack of difficulty was the control over Link. In the original game, Link could move in all 8 directions, but your sprite would only point up, down, left, or right, while in the remake, Link will snap to all 8 directions. And given the lack of D-pad support for whatever reason, this led to me constantly turning slightly at an angle and missing attacks that definitely should have hit. This is even more frustrating when you look at how they massacred the Roc's Feather. In the original, Link could bound over basically anything with the Roc's Feather, thanks to the game's selective Z-axis, and could ensure some hits. But in the remake, it barely feels like I can make most of these jumps over enemies because it's so short. It made the Hydrasaur fight a painful slog because I couldn't charge a spin attack and jump over it like I did in the original. And sure, I could have chased it with Pegasus boots, but it feels like the removal of the item experimentation that the original had, only heightened by the fact that the remake did exactly what I said I didn't want to see, with the sword, shield, Pegasus boots, and power bracelet all permanently equipped while leaving 2 buttons open for other items. Sure, now you don't have endless menu cycling, which is an improvement, but you also always have your sword and shield on hand, curb stomping what little difficulty was left in the first place. It was one of my favorite aspects of the original game, requiring you to sometimes forego your main offensive option in favor of a pair of items that were more appropriate for the context you were in. At least the remake added hero mode so veteran players can have some challenge brought back in, even if the inclusion of bottles that can capture fairies really does negate some of the added challenge no heart drops provides. Even the music doesn't escape from this pendulum of quality. There are some songs on this remake soundtrack that aren't incredible with this full orchestration, but a lot of them end up feeling too muddled now that there aren't the Game Boy's restraints on the songs. Angler's Tunnel is the most egregious example of this, taking what was an admittedly simple song that at least had a unique identity and injecting this harp instrumental that is in every other water level ever made. Many of the overworld tracks face the same issue, adding layers that didn't need to be there. But then you get something like the Face Shrine. Already the best dungeon theme, the remake's version of Face Shrine takes that oppressive nature and ratchets it up even higher with these droning strings that eventually transition into including that original discordant melody to make a theme that really sticks with the player. Like the Dark World, this is another one I just need you to listen to for a moment. And of course, the Ballad of the Windfish gets an entire rework that's just... God. All of the instruments actually have a place in this piece, supplemented with Marin's singing. It's magical. But that's undercut by this, a barely functioning dungeon maker that feels like a backdoor pilot for a Zelda maker we'll never get to see. Replacing the photographer is Dampe, a character originating from the 3D titles, who will create these layout challenges for the player to complete. But they are so painfully boring, reusing dungeon tiles from those you've beaten to create a layout that you know in advance, none of the fun of the tight, well-executed dungeons of this game. You don't get to control what enemies spawn in a room, how the stairs connect, how the chests spawn, control the puzzles, nothing. And it's this mode that hides the final heart piece rather than being a top turtle rock, taking the loving homage that Link's Awakening was paying to A Link to the Past and its final heart piece and hiding it behind this stupid-ass side mode. The system is also tied into Amiibo, something Nintendo was really trying to push with the Wii U but has largely fallen into the background ever since. Largely just collectible figurines, Amiibo also have an NFC chip that your Switch can read, allowing you to bring in new items or different features into your games by scanning them. And the dungeon builder in the remake has a couple of really cool things like a Shadow Link boss fight hidden behind this feature. Now, it is the big 2026, and I'm sure, just like you can find a way to play Link's Awakening without spending $60, I also know you can find a way to scan these amiibo without having to pay full price. But it's still a frustrating addition, forcing players to shell out even more money for a feature that doesn't need to be in the game. They also changed how warping works. In the original, as I've said, there were only 4 warp points, 5 if you wanted to include Mambo's Pond, but now there's double that number, and you can access any of them by playing the ocarina. This disincentivizes doing any of the actual backtracking that Link's Awakening's original design is built around. To replace that, you can just play a song, and bam, you're on the complete opposite side of the island. You don't have to engage in any meaningful way with the world now. It kind of ruins what makes the game so fun to play, that integral Metroidvania-style backtracking. The minigames were updated, but in a way that makes me hate all of them even more, including the Rapids Ride. I didn't talk about it in the original game section because I needed to wait for this. This is the worst fucking minigame in any Zelda game, bar none. Structured like a pachinko machine where you take control of the ball, this game costs 100 rupees to play, and I have never made my money back while playing it. At least the remake allows you to use the hookshot to navigate, even if it also hides a heart piece behind this upgrade. And don't get me started on the changes to the trendy game. Adding in physics and removing the conveyor belt makes this like any other claw machine, something that makes me want to shoot myself. Look, I've been very harsh on this remake, as one should be for what was a $60 purchase when it came out. But at the end of the day, this is still Link's Awakening. For all my gripes, the core of this game is solid. The secrets are fun to find. I just found that there were so many to make the intrinsic value of finding a secret overshadowed by the extrinsic value of getting another thing to boost a number. The dungeons are still the same as before, but some of their design has been altered in a way that makes them less engaging. The music is great in some places and middling in others. All in all, for someone who isn't used to the more anachronistic parts of the older Zelda games, maybe the remake is the way to go, but for me, it will always feel like trying to recapture a dream. A largely fruitless effort. Especially given that DX now has a home on the Switch's Virtual Console, there really is no better time to play this game, either as the remake or the original. It's a wonderful little game that I'm sure I will revisit at some point in the future much sooner than I did last time. And for real this time, I've been Flartman50, and that was the Link's Awakening retrospective. Sorry for tacking the remake onto the end, but it was looking like that would be a 10-minute video, and it felt like I could better sum up my thoughts at the end of the original rather than reiterate a bunch of points in that second video to make my thoughts clear. Seriously, if you haven't played this game before, give it a shot. It's never been easier to get your hands on this game or ways to play it. And if you have played Link's Awakening, let me know what you think of the game below. I love to hear from all of you. Be prepared for maybe some different content from me for the next few months, because the next retrospective is the big one and will be out when it's ready. Till then, I hope you have a wonderful day.